Greg had spent years humiliating Peyton, underestimating her, pushing her into the shadows. The two had sworn revenge against each other long ago, but this time, neither intended to walk away. Peyton planned a calculated mission to dismantle the bloodthirsty mercenary group Greg commanded, knowing there would be no second chances. When Greg learned of her move, he struck first, deploying 100 of his best men to erase her completely. What he didn't know was that Peyton had already anticipated every step. She chose the terrain, prepared the angles, and turned patience into a weapon. When the dust settled, 92 mercenaries lay defeated. Only 8 escaped alive, carrying terror instead of victory. The outcome shook Greg to his core. For the first time, he understood the depth of Peyton's experience and the precision behind her calm. He retreated, believing he could regroup, but for Peyton, this was no longer a warning, it was a declaration. She wasn't done, she wouldn't stop. This was only the beginning of her final pursuit, and Greg had just become the hunted. What drove Peyton to push this far? What history bound them so tightly to revenge? And how did it all truly begin? But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's understand how this story really began. Greg had always treated Peyton like obsolete inventory, a piece of gear past its service life, still functional, but no longer respected. In briefings, his mouth curled almost imperceptibly and her name surfaced, a micro smirk, a judgment. To him, she was a relic from a slower war, a woman who should have retired quietly instead of remaining an unmovable obstacle. For 10 years, their conflict had lived in the margins, intercepted contracts, sabotaged alliances, deniable skirmishes fought through proxies and rumors. A cold war conducted with lawyers, money, and whispers. That morning, Greg decided whispers were no longer enough. From his side of the table, escalation felt overdue. He leaned over a digital map, finger pressing down on a red-marked grid square buried deep in the pine forests of Washington state. Peyton's safe house, remote, defensible, predictable. He didn't blink as he issued the order. No hesitation, no restraint. He didn't send a team. He sent 100 contractors, former SOF, foreign legionnaires, men who had killed for money long enough that conscience no longer slowed their trigger pull. The intent was simple: overwhelm, erase, deny. 10 minutes, that was the estimate. At Peyton's property, dawn arrived wrapped in fog. Moisture clung to pine needles and rusted wire, muting sound, distorting distance. Peyton stood at the kitchen window, black coffee untouched in her hand. Her eyes tracked the tree line without urgency. She had slept fully dressed, boots by the door. The safe house was quiet, but not empty. Sensors hummed beneath the soil, passive infrared monitors feeding data into a hardened tablet on the counter. A faint vibration pulsed through the floor. Not whine, footfalls, too many, too deliberate. Her jaw set. A controlled inhale through the nose, the exhale barely moved her chest. The first perimeter tripwire snapped at 0617. Peyton didn't flinch. She had mapped every approach vector years ago, accounting for terrain, slope, and human error. The mercenaries moved fast and sloppy, confident in numbers, stacking where doctrine said they should. That confidence killed them. The forest erupted not in chaos, but in sequence. Claymores detonated with directional violence, steel bolts scything through compressed air, bodies dropped before screams could form. Those who survived the initial blast funneled forward, exactly where she needed them. Peyton moved through the structure with measured steps, muzzle discipline absolute, controlled pairs, center mass. One man stumbled into the fatal funnel by the shed, eyes wide, finger locking on his trigger as his nervous system caught up too late. The shot took him under the clavicle, instant drop. The hour stretched, elastic and brutal, smoke mixed with fog, carrying the metallic taint of blood and burnt propellant. Radio chatter dissolved into static. Men died alone, confused, never seeing her face. Peyton reloaded by feel, hands steady, breathing slow. Age had taken nothing from her that mattered. When it ended, the forest went still. 8 men ran. They didn't coordinate, they fled. Boots slipped in mud as they piled into the extraction van, hands shaking too badly to secure weapons. One of them looked back. On the ridge, framed against the thinning mist, Peyton stood upright, no injury, no cover. Her shoulders were squared, rifle resting low, eyes locked on them without hatred or mercy. She didn't pursue, She didn't wave, she watched. As the van disappeared down the service road, Peyton remained motionless, her pulse settled. The forest reclaimed its silence, now littered with the cost of Greg's arrogance. 92 bodies lay where planning met discipline and lost. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. Greg's command center was built to project control glass walls, muted lighting, soundproofing rated for blast concussion, but at that moment it felt too small to contain him. He paced between the steel table and the main display wall, shoes clicking in a tight, irregular rhythm. The glass of scotch in his right hand trembled despite the strength in his grip. A thin line of liquid sloshed against the rim, catching the light with each step. On the primary screen, the extraction van footage looped again. He leaned forward and jabbed the rewind control with his thumb, knuckle whitening. The image jumped back 30 seconds, again. He watched not as a commander, but as a man searching for proof that reality was wrong. There was no chaos. That was the first thing that unsettled him. No muzzle flashes strobing through trees. No overlapping radio calls. No panicked breathing flooding the comms. Just men moving, then stopping. Frames where a contractor stepped into view and the next frame where his body folded as if the power had been cut. Greg's jaw tightened. A muscle near his temple began to twitch, small and involuntary. He paused the footage and zoomed in on a fallen man's chest cam. Entry wound, tight grouping, slightly left of sternum. Another frame, second man, same placement. Controlled pairs, center mass, no wasted rounds. No pursuit fire. His breathing shortened. He felt it but didn't correct it. This wasn't a defensive scramble. This wasn't luck. It was preparation executed under stress, without deviation. Whoever had planned that kill zone had anticipated angles, reaction times, human hesitation. Peyton hadn't survived the assault, she had processed it. The realization settled low in his gut. Heavy and nauseating, he hadn't sprung a trap. He had delivered 100 men, in orderly waves, into a calibrated slaughter. A meat grinder built by someone who understood violence as scale and applied it with restraint. Greg's hand tightened. The glass shattered against the wall before he consciously decided to throw it. Crystal exploded outward, amber liquid streaking down imported plaster like arterial spray. He stood there for a second to lawn, chest rising sharply once, then again, as if forcing oxygen past a blockage. Nearly his entire battalion, gone. Worse than the loss was the implication. In their world, reputation was currency, fear was leverage. And now the story would spread, filtered through survivors with shaking hands and hollow eyes. 1 woman, 1 hour, 92 dead. Contracts would evaporate. Allies would distance themselves, rivals would circle. His left hand reached for the radio on the table. Fingers hovered over the transmit key. A secondary strike. Rotary wing gunships, incendiaries. He imagined the ridge burning, the forest erased down to bedrock. A scorched solution to a personal failure. The radio never key. His personal phone vibrated once against the table, not a call routed through his network. No encryption header, just a simple, unlisted number. Greg stared at it, a bead of sweat forming at the base of his neck. His thumb hesitated, then pressed accept. "Speak," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. The word came out clipped, brittle at the edges. For half a second, there was only ambient sound, whined. Then something metallic, precise, a slide racking on a pistol. The sound traveled through his nervous system faster than thought. "You missed," Peyton said. Her voice was low, controlled, stripped of emotion, no triumph, no threat. Just information delivered with professional economy. Greg's lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes flicked instinctively toward the cameras, the doors, the glass walls that suddenly felt transparent. On the line, Peyton breathed one slow, unhurried. Then the call ended. The screen in front of him continued to loop the footage. Bodies falling, silence, precision. Greg stood very still, phone clenched in his hand, pulse hammering against his jaw as the full weight of the mistake settled in. The origin of the hatred lay buried 5 years earlier, in a place officially recorded as a stabilization zone and remembered by those who survived it as a killing ground. Operation Obsidian unfolded under a white sun, heat shimmering off concrete stalls and corrugated roofs. Peyton had commanded the element from a forward position, helmet pressed low, eyes moving constantly between her team and the civilian marketplace unfolding below them. Vendors shouted in a language she barely understood. Children darted between carts. Her jaw tightened as she tracked movement through the optic, finger indexed, waiting. Greg had been attached as a contractor. Extra muscle, the briefing slide had called it. His men moved differently, less discipline in their spacing. Fingers closer to triggers, Peyton caught it immediately. She keyed her mic, voice controlled, clipped, hold fire, repeat, hold fire. Civilians in the open. The response never came. Instead, the first shot cracked through the square like a hammer on glass, then another. Automatic fire followed, shooing into masonry, bodies scattering as panic detonated through the crowd. Peyton's breath caught for a fraction of a second, long enough to register disbelief. Then she was moving, shouting orders, dragging her team into cover as return fire poured in from every direction. Greg's men used the chaos efficiently, breaching a reinforced kiosk at the far end of the market. Gold bullion spilled into duffel bags while civilians bled on the pavement. Pinned down, Peyton adjusted sectors, shoulders squared against recoil as she fired deliberately, counting rounds, conserving. A round punched through her left shoulder, spinning her halfway to the ground. The impact burned white-hot, her arm going numb almost instantly. She sucked air through clenched teeth and rolled, blood slicking her sleeve. Her youngest corpsman lay 5 meters away, frozen, shock locking his limbs. Peyton crawled, every movement tearing at muscle and tendon, and hooked her good arm through his vest. She dragged him inch by inch, vision narrowing, copper flooding her mouth as she fought to stay conscious. Above the gunfire, she heard laughter over an open channel. Greg's voice, amused, detached, then the sound of rotors as his team lifted out, leaving her element buried under fire and consequences they hadn't created. He survived, she survived, the truth did not. Back home, Greg's version moved faster than any after-action report. Through private counsel and quiet favors, blame shifted. Peyton's hesitation, Peyton's declining edge. In the review boardroom, fluorescent lights hummed while she stood at attention, uniform immaculate, shoulders still stiff beneath the fabric. Greg sat behind glass, untouched, words landed like measured strikes. Humiliation delivered with bureaucratic precision. Her trident hovered on the edge of revocation. Peyton's face never changed. A single slow blink, hands relaxed at her sides. She answered when required. Nothing more, she understood, than what a court-martial could not cure. She took the reprimand, took the silence, took the scar. She kept the bullet fragment, now it rested on her desk, dull and misshapen, beside a field notebook worn soft at the edges. As she stood at the window of her safe house, smoke still hanging over the lawn, she looked past the glass to where 92 bodies lay cooling in the dirt. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes steady, mouth set, something hard settling behind the calm. The line had been crossed. This was no longer professional rivalry. Greg had converted grievance into extermination. Survival now required finality. Peyton turned away from the window and moved through the house, boots crunching over shattered glass. She knelt, rolled back the rug, and keyed open the floor safe. The steel door lifted smoothly, revealing what she had hoped never to need again. Her breathing slowed as her hand reached inside. Peyton did not flee the aftermath. Flight was nose, panic left traces. She moved with the economy of someone who had rehearsed failure long before it arrived. The safe house lights stayed low as she initiated the first phase of the Ghost protocol, fingers moving across hardened devices with unhurried precision. Each keystroke severed a thread, bank access rerouted through dead shells, biometric signatures burned, satellite pings ghosted into false trails that would keep analysts busy for weeks. Her jaw tightened slightly as a final confirmation window blinked green. 6 hours vanished into tasking, verification, and controlled erasure. She packed without sentiment. The go bag lay open on the table, compartments already memorized. Encrypted solid-state drives slid into foam sleeves. 3 passports followed different names, different countries, edges worn just enough to pass inspection. She checked the Sig Sauer P226 last, racking the slide once, chamber clear, then seated the magazine with a firm, deliberate press. The metal was cold, familiar, reassuring. Still, she knew the weapon was incidental. Greg's real vulnerability wasn't physical, it was psychological. Peyton had watched men like him for decades, commanders who mistook control for strength, who required dominance the way others require oxygen. Greg did not fear death, he feared irrelevance. To destroy him, she would not breach walls or trade gunfire. She would dismantle the illusion that he was untouchable. She left the safe house before dusk, moving on to secondary roads that curved through timber and farmland, keeping her speed steady, hands relaxed on the wheel. Traffic cameras blinked past, ignored, their lenses pointed elsewhere thanks to the work already done. Her breathing settled into a slow cadence, eyes scanning mirrors out of habit, not paranoia. Seattle's industrial edge rose ahead of her in steel and concrete silhouettes. Greg's shell company logistics on paper, laundering operation in practice sat among warehouses that hummed quietly with legitimate commerce. Tayton parked a mile out, a forgettable sedan angled between delivery trucks. She sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, pulse even. Age had changed her margins, not her judgment. She no longer raced clocks, she bent them. From an elevated berm, she deployed the thermal scope. Human heat signatures bloomed white against the darker structures, guards pacing predictable routes, rifles slung, attention wandering in short arcs. Security had been doubled, more bodies, tighter spacing. Greg's fear showed in the overcorrection. Peyton's mouth curved almost imperceptibly, not a smile, just acknowledgement. Fear narrowed vision, it made men cling to procedure. She moved when the pattern reset. The drainage pipe lay half-hidden beneath scrout-band debris, water trickling steadily from recent rain. Tayton lowered herself without hesitation, boots slipping into the cold rush. The shock climbed fast, biting into muscle, but she kept her breathing shallow, controlled. Each step forward was deliberate, shoulders squared against the current, gear sealed tight. Above her, concrete and steel carried the weight of Greg's empire contracts, blood money. Leverage all resting on the assumption that no one would come from below. Her fingers brushed the pipe wall, slick with algae. She paused once, listening. The world reduced itself to sound and pressure and distance. Then she continued, moving deeper, the warehouse lights a dull glow ahead. Greg had built his operation on intimidation and reach. Tayton advanced through the cold toward its center, intent steady, expression unreadable. This was not an assault, it was an incision. Tayton emerged from the drainage system beneath the logistics hub with barely a ripple of sound. Water streamed off her sleeves as she pressed herself against the concrete wall, listening. Above her, the building breath ventilation fan cycling, transformers humming under load, the distant rhythm of boots on polished floors. She moved when the cadence aligned, slipping through a service hatch with practiced ease. The server room sat at the core of the facility, protected not by brute force, but by complacency. Keypad, biometric scanner. Redundant lock, Peyton defeated them in sequence, fingers steady, eyes tracking reflections in the glass as the door eased open. Cool air washed over her face, raising goose flesh along her forearms. Racks of servers blinked in orderly rows, leads pulsing like heartbeats. She connected her drive without ceremony. No wasted motion, no pause for satisfaction. This wasn't smash and grab. She wasn't there to zero out balances or salt accounts, though that would come later. This was intelligence acquisition, pattern mapping, proof. The screen filled with directory trees and encrypted volumes as her software went to work, keys unlocking with quiet inevitability. Her posture remained relaxed, weight balanced, head slightly tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. The progress bar crept forward. 90%, 95%. As files scrolled past, a name arrested her attention, not flagged, not highlighted, just wrong enough to pull her focus. Project Tartarus. The cursor hovered for a fraction of a second before she opened it. Her breathing stalled. The dossier populated slowly, page after page of photographs, financial statements, medical histories. Not targets in the field. Families, spouses stepping out of black SUVs. Children walking into schools. Medical records annotated with diagnoses and vulnerabilities. Private lives catalogued with clinical detachment. The Joint Chiefs of Staff. Peyton's jaw tightened, a faint tremor passing through her lower lip before she suppressed it. This wasn't leverage, it was a news. Greg hadn't just profited from violence, he had metastasized into the command structure itself, poisoning it with blackmail to keep contracts flowing and investigations buried. The scale of it pressed against her chest, heavy and suffocating. The download completed. A soft tone marked the moment. She should have closed the file then, extracted, moved on. Instead, her eyes caught a metadata entry buried near the bottom of the screen. Internal liaison, Pentagon clearance. The name resolved slowly, letter by letter. Commander Miller. Her fingers froze above the keyboard. For an instant, the server room dissolved, replaced by heat and blood and dust. A young corpseman's face streaked with grime, eyes wide with terror as rounds snapped overhead. Her own arm burning, useless, as she hooked him and dragged him through open ground, teeth clenched so hard her jaw ached for weeks afterward. Miller, her rookie, the one she had refused to leave behind. Her reflection stared back at her from the monitor, older now, lines etched deeper, eyes harder. A muscle in her cheek jumped once. She swallowed, throat working, and scrolled. There it was, a transaction log, coordinates transmitted. Timestamp matching the ambush at her safe house. Understanding landed with surgical clarity. Miller hadn't been coerced, he hadn't been trapped. He had chosen, sold her location, sold the lives of 92 men. Sold the woman who had bled to keep him alive. Tatan's hand trembled just once. The movement was so small it would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. She closed her fingers slowly until her nails bit into her palm, grounding herself in pressure and pain. Whatever grief tried to surface was cut off, cauterized. She backed up the files, encryption layers stacking cleanly. Her expression flattened, emotions stripped down to something colder and far more dangerous. Betrayal had clarified the mission. This was no longer about Greg alone. Tatan disconnected the drive, sealed it, and stepped back into the shadows, resolve locked in place like a chambered round. Tatan didn't limit herself to extraction. Theft alone left too many variables intact. Before disconnecting, she executed the second payload code written years earlier, never tested in the wild, designed to behave less like malware and more like entropy. It nested itself inside Greg's financial architecture, dormant and indistinguishable from routine ledger traffic. When activated, it would trigger a cascading failure. Shell companies calling in loans simultaneously, offshore accounts flagging compliance violations, transaction chains collapsing under their own weight. No alarms at first, just systems eating themselves alive. She sealed the terminal and turned away as if the room had already ceased to exist. The first alarm sounded as she crossed the maintenance corridor. A low, pulsing tone, hesitant, uncertain. Then another joined it, sharper, urgent. Overhead lights flickered once, twice, before dying completely. Emergency strobes failed to engage. The warehouse dropped into a darkness thick enough to feel against the skin. Voices rose, commands overlapped. Boots scuffed concrete as Greg's remaining men pivoted without cohesion. Someone fired. The muzzle flash tore a brief white hole in the dark, followed by another. Ricochets screamed. Panic spread faster than any fire. Tatan slowed. In chaos, speed was nose. She flattened herself against a steel support, breathing shallow, eyes adjusting. She moved when the firing shifted away from her position, slipping between shadows that no longer aligned with their owners. Her shoulders brushed a startled guard who never saw her face. She smelled cordite, sweat, fear. A man shouted her name into the dark, voice cracking on the second syllable. She reached the exterior control panel without resistance. Fingers danced across the interface, overriding safeties. One by one, magnetic doors slammed shut with hydraulic finality. The sound rolled through the building like a verdict. Trapped inside, men pounded on steel, curses muffled, gunfire erupting again as they turned on phantoms and each other. Peyton was already gone. By the time Greg's encrypted line lit up with the alert logistics hub compromised, internal lockdown triggered, she was miles away, seated in a vinyl booth beneath fluorescent lights that hummed faintly. A diner at the edge of a state highway, anonymous, timeless. She wrapped both hands around a chip mug, steam rising as she took a measured sip of black coffee. Her pulse had settled. Her reflection in the window was steady, unremarkable. On the television above the counter, a local news anchor spoke with practiced calm. Footage rolled of emergency vehicles clustered near the industrial park. A mysterious power outage disrupted operations earlier this evening. The caption read, "No mention of gunfire, no mention of locked doors, not yet." Tatan's phone vibrated once. She unlocked it and sent a single message through Greg's secure channel. No encryption theatrics, no commentary, just an image. Commander Miller, captured from a distance, profile unmistakable, leaning in close to Greg's bagman outside a private office building. Timestamp visible, location tagged. Beneath it, 2 words, I know. Across the city, Greg stared at his screen. The color drained from his face in stages, as if gravity had increased suddenly. His lips parted. His eyes flicked instinctively toward the door, then the windows, then nowhere at all. Control, his greatest addiction, slipped through his fingers without a sound. The rules had changed. He was no longer directing the hunt, he was inside it. And the perimeter was tightening. Greg did not sleep. He sat hunched forward in the half-light of a private room, elbows on his knees, jaw working as if grinding something bitter between his teeth. The phone lay heavy in his palm. Control had bled out of every other option. Contracts were collapsing, allies had gone silent. His name had become a liability spoken only in lowered voices. He understood the math now. Tayton could dismantle him piece by piece and never come within arm's reach. So he reached for the one asset she hadn't armored, Sarah. The operation was crude by his standards, rushed, tan, and elegant, but desperation stripped away aesthetics. The girl was taken cleanly, no gunfire, no witnesses who mattered. Greg watched from the shadows as duct tape sealed her mouth, her wrists cinched tight. Her eyes darted, searching for something stable in a world that had just tipped sideways. He looked away before the search could land on him. A muscle jumped along his cheek. The boiler room of the abandoned shipyard reeked of rust and stale water. Pipes swept slowly into oil-slit concrete. Greg positioned the camera himself, adjusting the angle until Sarah's fear filled the frame without obstruction. When he stepped into view, he smoothed his jacket once, a reflex that failed to calm the tremor in his hands. "Come alone, Grandma," he said, forcing the sneer into place. The word tasted wrong, but he leaned into it, or the family line ends tonight. He sent the file before doubt could surface. Miles away, Peyton watched the video in silence. She stood, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the screen. The image reflected faintly across her pupil Sarah's bound hands, the slight hitch in the girl's breathing, the way her chest rose too fast against the restraints. Tayton's face did not change, no moisture gathered at the corners of her eyes. Her pulse did not betray itself in her throat. When the video ended, she did not replay it. She set the device down with deliberate care and closed her eyes once. The room seemed to narrow, details sharpening as everything extraneous fell away. This was the moment where most people fractured, where emotion flooded the system and drowned judgment. Tayton's mind did the opposite. It compressed. Focus drew inward, hard and precise, like a lens clicking into place. She opened her go bag. Each movement was exact. Magazine seated, optic checked, suppressor aligned and locked. She ran a fingertip along the rifle's receiver, feeling for imperfections that weren't there. She knew the layout of the shipyard already. Greg favored places that made him feel large. She pictured the rafters, the sightlines, the angles of fire. 8 survivors, men who had run once and would not hesitate again. Sniper rifle 0 in advance, Overwatch positions layered with redundancy. She exhaled slowly through her nose. Miller would be there. The probability sat heavy but certain. Greg would want him close, either as insurance or absolution. Tayton acknowledged it without judgment. Facts were clean, feelings could wait. She slid the rifle's charging handle back. The sound was sharp in the quiet room, metallic and final, or round-chambered. Her grip tightened just enough to feel the texture bite into her skin. "Perfect," she whispered. The word carried no bravado. It was acceptance. This was a trap. She would walk into it anyway. The shipyard loomed like the remains of a dead animal picked clean by time, steel ribs exposed, cranes frozen mid-gesture, decks slick with salt and decay. Waves slammed against the pylons in uneven rhythms, sending vibrations up through the structure that Peyton felt through her boots before she heard them. She surfaced without a splash, breath controlled, hair slicked tight against her head, the harbor swallowing her entry as if she had never been there. She moved beneath the outer perimeter without slowing. Greg's mind sat where he expected fear to walk, obvious approaches, clean lines of advance. Tayton passed below them, fingertips brushing barnacled metal, muscles burning as she pulled herself onto a maintenance ladder. Water streamed from her sleeves, silent against the roar of the surf. Inside the lower decks, the air was stale and metallic. She paused long enough to listen. The hum of the generator threaded through the structure, steady and confident, to confident. She followed it by feel, boots barely lifting from the deck, body aligned to the shadows cast by emergency lights. At the generator housing, she knelt, jaw set, and pulled the panel. One clean motion severed the primary feed. Another ensured the backup wouldn't cycle. The lights died without warning. Darkness collapsed inward, thick and absolute. Somewhere above, a man cursed. Another voice answered too loudly. Tayton exhaled once. Slow, this was where she belonged. The mercenaries relied on their night vision optics the way addicts relied on ritual, never questioning the tunnel vision it imposed. Their world narrowed to glowing cones and false certainty. She climbed. The first sniper never knew she was behind him. He was prone, rifle braced. I pressed to glass. Tayton's knife slid under his jaw, angled up, precise. His body sagged, weight caught and eased down to avoid nose. She wiped the blade on his sleeve and moved on. The second turned at the wrong moment. A wire looped around his throat, pressure applied exactly where the carotid met bone. His boots scraped once, twice, then stilled. Tayton held him until the tremor left his hands. Each kill shortened her movements, no wasted steps, no hesitation. A shadow passing through shadows. By the fourth, the radio traffic shifted, confusion crept in, voices overlapping, checks repeated without response. Tayton used it, timing her approach between transmissions. The fifth fell to a suppressed impact against the temple. The sixth reached for his sidearm and found only air before she took him to the deck, forearm across his trachea, weight centered, pulse measured against resistance. The last two were veterans of failure. They repositioned, backs to steel, optics sweeping nervously. Tayton waited. Patience tightened her grip, slowed her breathing. When one adjusted his goggles, lifting them for a clearer look, she closed the distance and ended it. The final man broke, running blind into the dark. She intercepted him near a stairwell, knife flashing once. 8 gone. In the boiler room below, Greg felt it before he understood it. The radio sat heavy against his chest, its silence louder than gunfire. He pressed the transmit key, thumb slick with sweat. Report, he snapped. The word cracked at the end. Nothing answered. He tried again, jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped beneath his eye. Static hissed back, thin and mocking. He turned in a tight circle, boots scraping concrete, the pistol in his hand lifting toward every shadow. Then a voice cut through the frequency, calm, intimate. They can't hear you, Greg, they're gone. The lights flickered once, twice, then the boiler room dropped into darkness. Greg's breath hitched. He lunged for Sarah, yanking her upright, the gun shaking as he pressed it to her head. Her body trembled against him, restrained breathing sharp and uneven. His eyes darted wildly, pupils blown wide, searching for movement that refused to reveal itself. The dark pressed close. A flare screamed as it ignited, a violent hiss cutting through the cavernous silence of the industrial space. Red light flooded the room in brutal pulses, painting the steel beams, concrete floor, and hanging chains in the color of fresh blood. Smoke holed upward, acrid and hot, stinging the eyes and tightening the throat. Above it all, on the gray-red gantry, Tayton stood motionless. Her boots were planted shoulder-width apart, knees unlocked, center of gravity low. The weapon in her hands was lowered but not relaxed. Her trigger finger rested, indexed along the frame, disciplined, waiting. The flares like carved sharp shadows across her face, catching on the faint scar along her cheek and the rigid line of her jaw. Her breathing was slow, controlled, each inhale measured through the nose, each exhale barely visible in the rise of her chest. Below her, Greg staggered backward, the terrified girl crushed against him like a human shield. His arm locked around her neck, forearm pressing too close to the carotid. The girl's hands trembled as they clawed uselessly at his sleeve. Her breath came in thin, panicked gasps, fogging the area in front of her mouth. "Drop it, or she dies," Greg screamed, spittle flecked from his lips. His voice cracked on the last word, the sound sharp with fear he couldn't mask. His free hand shook as he brandished the pistol, the muzzle wavering just enough to betray him. Sweat streamed down his temple, cutting clean lines through the grime on his face. Tayton's eyes never left the angle of his elbow, the tension in his wrist, the way his finger rode the trigger too tight. She noted it all without moving, cataloging risk the way she always had. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then footsteps echoed behind Greg, slow, deliberate, heavy with hesitation. From the shadows at the far end of the floor, Commander Miller stepped forward. The red light caught him mid-stride, revealing the gun in his hands, raised with textbook form despite the tremor running through his arms. His shoulders were rigid, drawn up as if bracing for impact. His face was wet, tears streaking unchecked down his cheeks, glistening in the flare's glow. The muzzle of his weapon wasn't pointed at Peyton. It was pointed at Greg. Greg froze. His laughter died in his throat, replaced by a sharp intake of breath. "What are you doing?" he barked, eyes darting between Miller and Peyton. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Shoot her now." Miller didn't respond immediately. His hand shook harder, the tremor traveling up into his shoulders. His lower lip quivered, teeth clenching down as if to keep the words from breaking him apart. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, scraped thin by something deeper than fear. "I read the files she sent me, Greg." He swallowed hard. "All of them." Greg's grip tightened reflexively. The girl whimpered, the sound small and broken. "You didn't just blackmail the chiefs," Miller continued, each word forced out like a round chambered against resistance. "You set up the ambush 5 years ago." His eyes burned, locked onto Greg's face. "You're the reason I almost died. You're the reason she took that bullet from me." Above them, Peyton felt the weight of that hour-old decision settle fully into her chest. She had sent the unredacted files knowing exactly what they contained, knowing exactly what they would do. It had been a calculated gamble, trusting that conscience, once armed with truth, could overpower greed. The kind of risk that ended careers or lives. Greg's eyes widened, pupils blown. "She's playing you, kid," he snapped, desperation sharpening his tone. "She's manipulating you." For half a second, his attention fractured. That was all Peyton needed. Her stance tightened, muscles firing in silent coordination. The weapon came up in one smooth motion, no wasted movement, no hesitation. Her exhale matched the squeeze of the trigger. She fired. The shot echoed through the industrial space like a hammer striking steel. It was a single round, clean, controlled, final in its intent without being fatal. Peyton had chosen the placement with surgical precision. The bullet tore through Greg's right shoulder, shattering bone and ligament in a violent spray, the impact spinning him sideways. It was the same shoulder where Peyton had taken around 5 years earlier, the same angle, the same brutal lesson returned in kind. Greg's pistol clattered across the concrete, skidding until it struck a rusted support beam. His scream ripped out of him, raw and animal, as his body betrayed him. His fingers spasmed open. Sarah collapsed forward, gasping, her knees buckling as the pressure vanished from her throat. Her breath came back in sharp, uneven pulls, her chest fluttering like a trapped bird. Commander Miller moved without hesitation. The moment the weapon hit the floor, he surged forward, his boots pounding against concrete. He wrapped an arm around Sarah's shoulders, pulling her behind him, his other hand sweeping her head down instinctively, shielding her from any follow-up threat. His jaw was clenched so tightly a vein pulsed along his neck. His eyes never left Greg. Greg dropped to his knees. Blood soaked through his sleeve, dark and spreading fast. He cradled the ruined arm against his chest, fingers slick and trembling, his face twisted, in disbelief more than pain. He looked up as Peyton descended the stairs, her footsteps steady, unhurried. Each step rang with quiet authority. He waited for the second shot. He leaned into it, almost welcoming it. "Do it," Greg screamed, spitting blood onto the floor. His lips peeled back in a desperate grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Finish it." Peyton stopped in front of him. She didn't raise her weapon. Instead, she calmly engaged the safety and holstered it, the motion deliberate, final. She stood over him, her posture relaxed but immovable, like a force of nature that had already passed judgment. In the red glow fading from the flare, she didn't look like a grandmother. She looked like something older, harder, a veteran shaped by decades of conflict, discipline etched into every line of her face. "Death is too easy for you, Greg," she said softly. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. "I sent the blackmail files to the agency," she continued, eyes locked onto his. "Everything, financial trails, communications, the ambush order." A brief pause. "They're not coming to arrest you." Greg's breathing hitched, his pupils dilated, the color draining from his face. "They're coming to erase you." In the distance, sirens cut through the night, not the familiar wail of local law enforcement, but the low, urgent howl of unmarked black SUVs moving fast. Greg knew that sound. Men like him always did. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Fear settled over him like a suffocating weight, deeper than pain, deeper than death. He had lived long enough in the shadows to understand what happened to liabilities. Peyton turned away. She walked to Miller and Sarah, placing a steady hand on the girl's back. Sarah flinched at the contact, then leaned into it, her shaking beginning to slow. Together, they moved toward the exit. The night air outside was cool, clean, washing the smoke and blood from their lawns. Peyton didn't look back. Behind them, Greg remained on his knees, clutching what was left of his arm, staring into the inevitable. Vindication wasn't found in pulling the trigger again. It was in restraint. In truth exposed, in proving that integrity honed over decades of service, sacrifice, and silence would always outlast brute force and greed. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to the channel for more cinematic, true-to-life narratives of justice, resilience, and quiet professionals who never needed recognition to make a difference.